Are there any questions?
I was wondering what it was a graph that had like a bunch of pink lines and dots on it, what that was visualizing, what data that was about, or maybe it was just an example of how the patterns relate to each other.
Yeah. That color diagram with the colored dots and how they were all in a network.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a graphic depiction of what a pattern language looks like. So each dot in that was represented as a pattern. And so the lines that connected them were how those patterns connect or relate to each other.
Okay. Was this one of Christopher Alexander's?
I think it could have been one of his hand sketches, because it's what I found when I was looking for images of pattern language,
Okay.
and it came up, and it looked like a really interesting depiction.
In order for something to be included in this template of pattern language, because you were discussing how to decide if something was just an example or whether it was actually part of the pattern language.
Right.
The pattern language I imagine that you're trying to come up with is something that would be globally useful.
Yes.
So I guess then the criteria to make sense would have to be not an example that's a local example, but a pattern that's globally useful.
Well, it could be both, because it has to relate to the real world.
Yeah, like for
It
instance,
has to come out of the real world somewhere.
one of the examples was something about sun, so that it was more applicable to a northern climate.
Right.
In a desert
Right.
climate, you're not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
Right, so then it's just an example, it's not part of the useful global.
Right. Okay. So the decision you're making, you see, the decision you're making is how relevant will it be to everyone. So sun trap will be relevant to some people. And so if you're living in a desert and you're selecting patterns, you don't have to select sun trap. Just go on to whatever will be useful for you.
In Alexander's book, his patterns were all pretty much globally used.
That's right. So we're in an environmental context now that's related to the globe. So we have to be, I think we need to be a bit more relaxed about it there, because we want this available to everybody. Yeah. So there's a bit of a dilemma, but it comes down to your personal decisions on what you're going to accept into your project or not. So you can just make that decision. Yes.
I always got the impression that the pattern language is a work in progress,
Yes.
not a centerpiece where it like. Done.
Yeah, it is.
So-
He never intended it to be static or for it to ever end. It was never intended to come.
Well, patterns
to
don't
completion.
end by nature.
That's right. Patterns just keep going.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
to me, to have that rigidity of like, oh, this is supposed to work in every context across all time periods, that doesn't make much sense.
No,
But as an example before you project.
Yeah.
but you have to test it in the real world to see if it's actually working, if it works. And we'll get to testing in just a minute, because I do have a testing page. Yeah.
I just want to ask, is there within the language something that you see as sort of a flag system where, say you're using pattern language to examine the tobacco industry or the marketing and sales of bottled water? Is there something where you can see in that where there is a disconnect to other surrounding patterns, and that therefore lets you know that this is not a sustainable practice?
It's not like
Right.
So what would you call that pattern?
Dysfunctional, yeah.
It's an interesting concept.
But those are obvious ones that we now know. But what if you're looking at the potential oversaturation of marijuana want to, which I think we're going to experience in the next 5 years, there's going to be another bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But maybe we don't know that. Can we use the pattern language to predict these things? But something, I think it seems like a good idea.
Well,
you know, down the line.
In The Timeless Way of Building, the first volume, he talks about dead patterns, and that you don't choose dead patterns because they don't contribute to the aliveness.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah, so you accept a pattern as a legitimate pattern when it contributes to aliveness. And if it doesn't, it could be a dead pattern.
But and therefore, that's a very useful skill to warn us.
Well,
we've
yeah.
gotten into things as a society before where
Yeah.
it seemed like a good idea
Yeah.
at the time. And then
He doesn't list dead patterns. He gives examples of them in his introduction. So that the practitioner needs to be aware that if they're coming up with their own patterns, that they should test them, make sure they're alive, that they're not.
And that might take a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, or just your intuition. You know, every project is interpreted by a different set of people, so they can come up with their own interpretations. And so it's how good you are at basically discerning if a pattern is really alive, or in fact if it's dead and not contributing aliveness. If you just use that as criteria, if you can't discern that, then good luck. Good luck with your project. So it comes down to actually making those decisions, and that's what keeps the pattern language alive. Because if the project fails, then you're not around to, I guess you could try to correct it, but there has to be this level of discernment in order for it to carry on. That's what we're trying to say.
Lovely start. Next steps. Is there a website, email contact, something you're asking people to get involved? I probably can't personally engage, but I know people quite possibly could. But how do we connect those dots?
Right. I could just give you my email. It's an email. At the very bottom in the red, it's a red blush, or on the other ones too. It's a. Is it a BMTS? Oh, it's a Gmail. Okay, you can use that Gmail. There's a website as well. Yeah. So you see, my whole impetus was was to lend legitimacy to something that is essentially undisciplined, but it has so much to offer that it should really be consolidated in a form that other people can refer to. That was the whole impetus of carrying forward with this pattern language for permaculture. Yes?
Are some patterns implying that there is a best practice in most situations and circumstances? So for example, with the urban planning, you're talking about growing food right next to the restaurant. How do you make that decision versus doing indoor agriculture, year-round agriculture, something that might be more productive or could be a better use of space in high-density urban environments?
Well, that has to come through your visioning of your project. So the clearer your vision is, the better selection of the patterns within the whole language you will be able to make. And those will give you guidance as you go through and implement that project.
Right, okay, so suppose you start a design process, and would you then go through the permaculture pattern language dictionary essentially and say we want to have food production, compost, farm retail, whatever,
Yeah.
and then choose the technologies that sort of bring those patterns to life?
Yes, or just include them in the design, in the functional aspect of that design. So let's say you want local food. You have to decide what kind of local food you're going to be growing, but there will be patterns for those, as we saw in the examples. So there could be an urban microfarm. That might make a lot of sense for the project that you're working on. So that will give you guidance in terms of what a microfarm is and how it's organized and so forth, as that pattern is explained either on the website or in the publication.
I guess I'm still trying to figure out how specific a pattern has to be. Like, is food production a pattern, or is urban microfarm a pattern, or is like rotational grazing chicken tractors a pattern?
They're
or is
both
like my fried egg a pattern?
That's right. That's right. They're all patterns at different scales. So it helps to understand the general idea of growing local food, and that will be explained in sort of general terms, and why that's a problem if you don't do that, and what the solution is. And then at the end of that description, there'll be references to all the other related patterns beneath it, so that you can refer to those then. And then, and as I said, it depends how clear your vision is. If you don't have a clear vision for your project, maybe you can use the pattern language just to brainstorm. But sooner or later, you have to make those decisions.
Okay.
Right.
So some patterns may just be applicable to transition as opposed to permanent cultural sustainability.
That's a good point, and that could be.
So I'm not sure how the template would deal with things like
Yeah. Well, the way to do it is to test it. Does it bring aliveness? Does it contribute to the whole? Does it raise the level of morality of a project? And if it passes, those basic criteria, you can come up with other criteria if you want. Maybe one criteria is it transitional or not? It would seem to me as though patterns can come and go. And they vary from age to age and location to location. So it would make sense to have transitional patterns. Thanks, everyone.